In a quiet suburb, within a modest home where warmth and understanding prevailed, a story full of unexpected twists unfolds. At the heart of the narrative is a young woman, 20 years old, whose life is suddenly altered by strange circumstances. A family of 4, hardworking and devoted parents, and 2 kindred spirits of children who shared joys and sorrows, seemed to live an ordinary life. However, behind this idyllic facade lay secrets capable of shattering their familiar routine. One day, while she was studying, the girl's attention was drawn to a strange noise coming from her younger brother's room. The indistinct and persistent sound piqued her curiosity, which she found impossible to ignore. After a brief hesitation, she decided to find out what was happening. As she gently pushed the door open, she froze at the sight. Until that day, everything had been routine. Her parents, as usual, had gone to work, and she had immersed herself in her studies in the quiet of her room. Suddenly, the silence was broken by peculiar sounds emanating from her brother's room. It wasn't music or video game noises, but something rhythmic and unpredictable, making it difficult to concentrate. After a soft knock went unanswered, curiosity took over, and she cautiously opened the door. What she saw shocked her. Her brother was sitting on his bed, clutching her photograph, taken on her last birthday. And then, it's better not to go into detail. Let's just say he was engaged in something private under the blanket. She froze in place, unable to comprehend what she had witnessed. Embarrassment and confusion overwhelmed her. When her brother noticed her, his face flushed, and his eyes filled with panic. "What are you doing here?" he mumbled, hastily covering everything with the blanket and clutching the photograph even tighter, as if fearing it would be taken away. A suffocating silence descended. The girl's heart constricted, rendering her speechless. "What are you doing?" she managed to stammer, her voice trembling with confusion and anger. "I don't know. Please, don't ask me to explain," her brother pleaded, averting his gaze. He looked devastated, frightened, and deeply ashamed. Seeing him in such a state, her heart broke. Part of her wanted to yell at him, but another part couldn't ignore the fear and vulnerability in his eyes. Without a word, she hastily retreated to her room, closing the door behind her. Leaning against the wall, she tried to calm her breathing but felt as if she were drowning. The image of her brother holding her photograph haunted her. Questions swirled in her mind. Why did he do it? Had she inadvertently provoked these feelings? Was this truly the same brother who had always been her rock and support? The night passed in solitude and fear. Her brother also locked himself in his room, and the atmosphere in the house became cold and heavy, as if everything had changed overnight. Memories of what she had seen gave her no peace. Fear gripped her, but strangely, it was mixed with something else. The next morning, she woke up early, trying to act as if nothing had happened. Her brother briefly emerged from his room but avoided looking at her or speaking. His eyes darted around, and he seemed to desperately want to disappear. Later, when their parents returned, they greeted them with smiles, oblivious to the tension in the air. She forced herself to smile back, but her heart felt heavier than ever. At dinner, her brother sat silently, head bowed, ate quickly, and, without a word, retreated to his room. In the following days, he barely left his room. Every interaction between them became strained and awkward. He avoided her gaze, as if fleeing not only from her but also from his own shame and regret. The girl didn't know what to do. A strange feeling lingered, but most of all, she worried about her brother. He had always been her closest friend, and she didn't want this to destroy their bond forever. The continued silence only intensified her anxiety. One night, sitting in her room, she realized she couldn't bear it any longer. Her parents were fast asleep, and the house was quiet. She decided to do something to break the silence. Leaving her room, she paused outside her brother's door. Light filtering through the crack indicated he was still awake. She took a deep breath and quietly knocked on the door. What would happen next? What words would be exchanged? Could brother and sister overcome this crisis and restore their connection? The answers to these questions lay hidden behind the closed door. In the silence, a question hung in the air, falling from her lips. Alexander? Her voice was soft, like a gentle breeze. A moment of oppressive silence was broken by a quiet, timid response. Behind the room's door, Alexander appeared, slumped on his bed, his gaze fixed on the floor. An invisible wall had risen between them, a barrier no one dared to cross. "Alexander," she began, sitting on the edge of the bed, maintaining a distance. "I need to talk to you about what happened." "Please, no words needed." Alexander cried out in despair, his voice trembling like an autumn leaf in the wind. He turned away, avoiding eye contact. "I know I did wrong. I'm sorry, but I don't want to hear anything." Her heart ached with pain. Before her was not the carefree youth, but a younger brother broken by sorrow. She sighed, trying to keep her voice gentle. "I'm not blaming you, Alexander. I just want to understand what happened, and most importantly, I don't want you to drown in this." Alexander remained silent, his shoulders trembling slightly. After a moment, he mumbled, "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know why it happened. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. It just happened. And when you saw me, I just wanted to disappear." His voice broke, on the verge of tears. She felt his inner struggle, and this pain hurt her the most. She sat silently beside him, giving him time to compose himself. After a few minutes, Alexander said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want you to hate me. I know this is wrong, but I don't understand why I'm acting like this. I hate myself, I hate this feeling. I don't want anything to change between us." Her heart was torn by his words, by his sincere feelings, which stirred a storm of contradictions within her. She didn't know how to explain, how to fix the situation. But one thing was clear, Alexander needed her, not an ideal sister, but someone who would help him through this. The distance between them felt like a taut string, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Alexander, head bowed, clutched the blanket as if battling the raging emotions within him. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of tenderness. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension in his body. "You hate yourself. We all get lost in our feelings. But if it helps, I want us to face this together and get through it once and for all." Alexander looked up at her, his eyes red from tears, full of fear and hope. "You mean you don't hate me?" His voice was a plea and a question. She shook her head. The heaviness in her heart made it hard to breathe. "I want you to get through this, Alexander. I'll be here to help you." Alexander looked at her, as if trying to find truth in her words, and then, unable to hold back any longer, reached out and hugged her tightly, afraid she would disappear. She didn't pull away. Instead, she gently stroked his back, trying to comfort him, though she wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing. "Sister," Alexander whispered, his breath on her ear. "I don't know if this is right, but I can't stop." Her body tensed, but she didn't move. Alexander leaned closer, his eyes seeking her consent. In that moment, all her rationality was overwhelmed by emotion. She knew it was wrong, that her mind screamed, reminding her of the forbidden line. But her heart seemed to ignore all warnings. The boundaries that once separated them collapsed. Alexander was in an emotional abyss, and if this was the only way to relieve him of his torment, she believed it was worth it. The moment her hand gently touched his back, all distance between them vanished. Alexander looked at her with eyes full of hope and fear, as if awaiting a final sign. And when his lips touched hers, gently but with strong emotion, she knew they had crossed a line they could never uncross. That night, there was no suffocating silence, only raging emotions, as if they both wanted to erase all pain and completely lose themselves. Everything happened rapidly, like a tornado. A defeated Alexander lay still on the bed with his eyes half open, as if lost in thought. She didn't dare to look back. In her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, stunned and exhausted, not only physically but emotionally. Her heart was heavy. She wasn't sure if her decision was right, but she hoped it would help Alexander overcome his inner torments. The next morning greeted her with a feeling of utter emptiness, as if the past night had been a continuous series of battles. Memories of the events of the previous night clung to her, preventing her from concentrating on anything else. However, gathering her strength, she decided to let go of the past. Whatever happened, life had to go on. She needed to see Alexander and ensure her decision had brought the expected results. With anxiety in her heart, she went to the living room. The first thing she saw was Alexander, comfortably settled on the sofa. His eyes sparkled with joy, and a soft, welcoming smile played on his face. "Hi, Anna," Alexander exclaimed, his voice unusually light and casual. She froze in astonishment, unsure how to react to such a change. Alexander, standing before her, seemed like a completely different person compared to the one she had seen the night before. The dark, lost, hurt look was gone, replaced by a carefree expression, as if the heavy emotions had left him. Noticing her confusion, he smiled and asked, "What's wrong? You look tired. Didn't you sleep well?" She forced herself to smile back, trying to hide her inner turmoil. "Oh, nothing special. Just a little tired." Alexander rose from the sofa, walked over to her, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes conveyed sincere gratitude. "Thank you for everything. It seems all of that is behind me now. I know last night was difficult for you, but I feel much better now." Hearing these words, she felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt relief that her decision had helped Alexander overcome his emotional pain, but on the other, a sense of guilt lingered. After Alexander left, she immersed herself in thoughts about what had happened. It was undeniable that seeing him happy again was a huge relief. However, she understood that a significant price had been paid for it. She firmly resolved that something like this would never happen again. Alexander seemed to have dealt with his conflicting emotions, and now she needed to return everything to normal. But could she ever completely erase the traces of her mistake? The answer remained unclear. As time passed, the relationship between her and Alexander seemed to return to normal. Neither of them ever mentioned that night again, as if it had never happened. Alexander smiled again, chatted cheerfully with her, and called her sister in his usual, carefree tone. He truly seemed to have overcome those overwhelming emotions that had burdened him for so long. Seeing him become the happy and carefree Alexander she knew again brought her some relief. However, deep inside, a feeling of guilt continued to hover, like an inescapable shadow. Every time Alexander looked at her with his calm eyes, she wondered, had he truly forgotten everything, or was he just hiding his true feelings to spare her pain? Days passed, and they continued to interact as if nothing had happened. Alexander shared his plans and dreams for the future with her, and she listened attentively, nodded, and tried to encourage him. Yet, within her, there was a constant reminder of how they had crossed a forbidden line. One day, when Alexander was sitting next to her in the room, telling something amusing, she was momentarily distracted. He turned to her and looked at her with a tenderness she had never noticed in his eyes before. "You look very beautiful when you smile," he said softly. She froze for a moment, trying to maintain her composure. "Oh, don't flatter me," she replied, her voice a little strained. He just smiled back, said nothing, and the conversation continued as if nothing had happened. Yet, she couldn't shake the question, what was he really thinking at that moment? Had Alexander truly dealt with his feelings, or was there still a part in his heart that neither of them should have touched? Unlike Alexander, she couldn't forget so easily. Every night, falling asleep alone, she relived the events of that night, suffocating from the overwhelming memories. She asked herself, if she had the chance to go back in time, would she make the same decision again? The answer remained unclear. She was glad that Alexander had been freed from his tormenting emotions. However, this relief was accompanied by a heavy burden of guilt. She had crossed a line she should never have crossed. Every time she looked at her husband, she felt even greater pain. He suspected nothing of what had happened and still treated her with boundless love and trust, which only intensified her guilt. However, she dared not say anything, partly out of fear of destroying the fragile balance in her relationship with Alexander. Nevertheless, she understood that she had to move on. She couldn't change the past, but she could do everything possible to ensure that nothing like it happened again. Alexander indeed seemed happier. He smiled more often, and his eyes glowed with joy. Perhaps what she did was the right decision, at least for Alexander. But for her, the feeling of guilt continued to linger in the air, like an inescapable shadow. She didn't know if she could ever completely get rid of this feeling, but she understood that she would have to live with it, as part of the price she had paid. Whatever happened, she had to continue fulfilling her role as a wife and sister in this family. Every day, one strives to protect their inner state from negative thoughts, realizing that to preserve achieved happiness, one must avoid anything that could disrupt inner peace. Looking back on the past, she realizes that her biggest mistake was allowing emotions to override reason. The root of this lies in insufficient honesty, both with herself and with loved ones. Instead of openly facing her loneliness and seeking healthy ways to overcome it, she chose a path that only complicated the situation, and now she must bear the burden of that choice. She did everything she could to move forward, however, unfortunately, she chose the wrong path, one that left a deep and indelible mark on her heart. Marriage, like any other relationship, requires honesty and open communication. Avoiding internal problems not only fails to solve them but exacerbates the situation. She should have spoken openly with her partner from the beginning, as soon as she felt the need for more attention and closeness. This mistake not only undermined her self-esteem but also negatively impacted the relationship as a whole. She came to realize that emotions, however strong, require control. Uncontrolled emotions can lead to impulsive actions that deprive both the individual and those around them of peace. Honesty, morality, and self-respect are values that should not be sacrificed under any circumstances. It is important to be honest in expressing one's emotions, without hiding or suppressing negative feelings. Discussing problems with a trusted person, especially a partner or close family, can help find the right solution early on. Respecting boundaries in any relationship is of immense importance. One should not allow blind emotions to cloud judgment and push them into making decisions they will regret for the rest of their lives. Healthy ways to relieve stress must be found. In moments of loneliness or stress, it is crucial to seek constructive ways to cope, such as engaging in sports, hobbies, or socializing with friends. The feeling of loneliness must not be allowed to push one into making mistakes. The true value of marriage should be understood. Marriage is not only about love but also about commitment, fidelity, and devotion. One should not allow temporary difficulties to destroy long-term relationships built on these principles. This story is a valuable lesson, and she hopes that people who feel lost will carefully consider their actions and seek help, rather than acting on impulse. One must not allow temporary weaknesses to destroy what is valuable to them. With this, her story concludes. She expresses gratitude to everyone who listened to her sincere confession.